This group started with what, 5 of us in the parlor? Six. And the fact that there are only 16 here would be a bad thing if it weren't for the fact that I really like that group of 6. Thank you all for being part of this. Are any of you here for the first time? Welcome. It's fun having dinner with you. 2 of you. Welcome.
Stand up and say their names for everybody else.
How about that? Why don't you stand and say your name?
For everybody else.
And if you'd like, a brief biography and a list of your major accomplishments and your children. No.
No. My name is Mary Frances Kerner. I moved here from Alexandria, Virginia.
Excellent. Welcome, Mary.
And I'm Helen Graham, here from Jacksonville.
Welcome, Ellen. One of the things that I would like to see happen, we're going to have a general discussion, which we haven't had for some time. We've had speakers, and I think some of the speakers have been very good. Some have been less good. It's the nature of speakers. I personally have really enjoyed when we've done the conversations. Can I ask, Jeannie, would you mind possibly going over here so I don't have to turn to the left to look at you? If Forrest were here, I'd have him sit here, and then I'd be. But at least this way we're closer together.
He was getting dizzy.
And that we don't want.
Pass out.
But as I was saying, it might be a good idea. In fact, I'd like very much if you would talk to friends and see if they're interested in current events. And let's get back to it as it's slowly wandering in, a larger group. As I said in the email, I thought what we do today is talk about current events, which is an odd thing to do at a meeting called Current Events. But it's different from talking about a particular topic which may or may not be radically current. I respect candidates and their very current need to get their name out. But by definition, candidates vary in terms of their level of interest and interestingness. That's the right way to say it. So let's make this at least the beginning of the conversation. I sent out 4 topics. One was to talk about the recent raid on Mar-a-Lago. And I have a suggestion about how to contextualize that. And then I suggested we talk about the CHIPS bill, the bill to encourage production of chips to increase our competitive advantage relative to, or disadvantage, decrease the disadvantage relative to China. I called it the assault weapon ban, which it's not. But Cornyn's, and thank him as a Republican senator, gun legislation, which does do some very good things. Talk about that. I think it was the 4th topic. Does anybody remember what it was? I want to thank you all, especially for reading carefully the things that I sent out. Well, Don.
Didn't you sort of pre-position this when you said the raid on Mar-a-Lago? Isn't it more the FBI? I mean, couldn't you give it in a little more scientific?
Well, that's
You sound like a lot of the Republicans.
thank you. And then that tees up something. In advance notified to Trump the situation where his lawyer was present the entire time, where it began at 10 o'clock, not at 6:30, and it was a controlled search, a controlled and government-approved search. That event, not a raid, has been discussed more and more. I want to talk, though, about the implications of the way we talk about that, and do so in terms of polarization. We've talked about it before, but I think it's something that needs to be talked about and talked about and talked about to see if I was happy to hear Bill Tickle come in and say, where do the people in the middle sit? And my objective, I suppose, would be to see more and more of this move from the fringes, left and right, toward a center where we can use language that's more descriptive and clear, and agree upon the things that are shared values. Sure, there are some things that are not, and we've made it our commitment to be agreeably disagreeable or to agreeably disagree. But some thoughts about polarization. The population over 18, that is to say the voting population in this country, is 207 million. Of that, 70% are registered to vote, which frankly I think is a relatively high percentage, but among democracies it's not. And in some countries, registration is essentially compulsory. It's something that happens with any federal license or registration. You're automatically also registered to vote. How many of you think that would be a good idea here, by the way? Sort of automatic registration. If you get a driver's license, it includes registration to vote. And if you buy a car and register your car. Don?
I would take it a step further and say that everyone must cast a ballot. They don't have to vote, but they must cast a ballot.
Let's go a step further, and I think that's a good idea. Problem is, it's harder to enforce than that automatic registration. Of those registered, the 70% registered, 60% voted. And I think I was surprised at that percentage. I thought that the voting registered voters would be far fewer than that. But again, compared to Western democracies, it's low.
60% of 70%?
60% of those registered voted, meaning 40% of those registered did not. Some interesting data. How many of you think that the Democratic Party is larger than the Republican Party? Interesting. Well, you're not right. 40% of those registered to vote registered as Democrats. 25% registered as Republicans, and 30% as independents. So 40% versus 25%. Yet we're so evenly divided, Senate at 50-50. And I'll come back to that in a second. Both parties are more radical today than ever before. And I think that's because in both parties, the radical fringe has grown. It's no longer just this tiny fringe on the left or the tiny fringe on the right. 92% of the Republicans are to the right of the median. This data comes from the Census Department. I have no idea how they describe the median, but 92%, 94% of Democrats are to the left of the median, which says that both are more one way or the other than sort of just down the middle. 27 of the 249 elected Republicans in Congress, 27 of 249 acknowledged that Biden won the 2020 election. I mean, to me, that's mind-numbing. I mean, whether you love them or hate them, it's hard for me. Now, there are Republicans here. Help me understand that. Do any or many of you believe that Biden was not elected? Jean?
Hold on, this is going to be a little bit challenging. It's an obstacle course now.
I think that there's lots of Republicans who are fearful about expressing their real feelings about the election, and that there has been so much backlash against Republicans who has contended that the election was valid in every respect, that number is very, very misguided.
That's interesting. It's also interesting to note that those who deny the election are elected Republican members of Congress. My guess is they're more radical because to be elected, to be nominated, to be considered political, you have to be active. And for the left and right, that means radical or more radical. And then to be chosen as you go up through the process, you have to stay to the left or to the right to get the job. Interesting thing I read this morning. The full year average of generally the 40% Democrat, 25% Republican thing, since over the course of 2021, now this is a half year old, there's been a 9-point Democratic shift. A shift from a 9 percentage point Democrat advantage to a 5-point Republican advantage. It's a 14% shift in the population, and I guess that's dissatisfaction with Biden or with Biden's policies. How many of you here like Biden as president? That seems to be most, I think, of the Democrats. I'll say right now, I'm not one of them. I think his policies are good. I think he's a great guy. But I think he's too old to be president. And I think that shows over and over and over again. How many of you dislike Biden, either for policy or for age?
He's not important enough to like or dislike.
Well, the unfortunate thing about those unimportant presidents is that as a president, they have extraordinary power, and you know that.
Problem.
And you know that. Then I thought, if it's not just how you register, but where you spend your money, maybe we'd see, wow, the Republicans raise so much more money than the Democrats, and so many more Republicans give. Most of you agree with that? Well, a couple nod your head. Bill doesn't. The Democrats, as a number of people, give more. Donations are roughly double the national average of ideologically consistent Democrats, liberals. 31% have donated money. Conservatives, only 26%. And 8% of those with mixed ideological views have donated to a candidate and they go back and forth. Numerically, more Democrats give money than Republicans.
Well, can we go back to the question you just asked? You asked here, how many people like Biden? Maybe we ought to hear why you like Biden.
That's a good idea. For those of you who raised their hands saying yes on Biden, what are the reasons that you are happy with him?
Raise your hand if you want to talk. Okay.
Jim?
Considering what he inherited.
Speak up.
Considering what he inherited from the Trump administration, I think he's doing an excellent job. To say that he's too old or too young or something, to me, that's just how can he physically perform. And I don't get a doubt that Biden is performing. Now, it's a whole different question for the country. Do you want to have a limit on how old the president can be? I don't think we do, but.
You think we should have a limit? You think we should have a limit on how old you can be?
No, I don't think we should have a limit.
Did you hear that? He said he doesn't believe we should have a limit on age.
How many of you here are over 70? $75. 80. Okay, then how many of you would feel comfortable going to work every day, 7 in the morning, and working till at least 7 at night, reading extensively, giving speeches repeatedly and having them memorize or at least read through and understand the speech you give? I think I can do it for half a day. But the idea and I'm 77, I'm young. The idea of an older person, call it 80, doing the work required of a president. I mean, I understand, Jim, your idea that we shouldn't have caps on age because there's some really good there's great aged experience. But the workload, it seems to me, is just prohibitive. Now, Biden wasn't, for those of you, and I happen to be a Biden friend, listen to his speeches years ago. He was not the greatest speaker. He'd miss things, he'd stumble over words, he'd repeat himself or skip things in the sentence.
He had a stutter.
I'm sorry, and stutter all the time. A lot of this is overcoming the stutter. I didn't see you sitting over here, I apologize, I'm not turning all right. That's been exacerbated a bit with age. My problem with Biden is just that, his leadership presentation. But if Jim, here's where I'm going to totally agree with you. You stop and look legislative piece by legislative piece, appointment by appointment. Again, there'll be disagreement. I understand that, Democrat versus Republican. Interestingly enough, though, it's about a 50-50 disagreement. And I think that makes it hard to govern. A 50-50 Senate really makes it hard to make things happen. Or a 50-50 Senate stops bad things from happening. And both are true. And Democrats with a 50-50 Senate would be delighted that certain things can be blocked because they have 50 votes. And Republicans are delighted that their 50 votes are the same. Charlie?
Yeah, I don't mean to monopolize this thing, but most former people on this side are constantly sleeping. Okay. I think he's the example of the Peter Principle. I don't know how many have read the book, The Peter Principle, that in business or in whatever it is, eventually you reach your level of incompetence. You can do very well at this level, pretty good at this level, but at this level, the demands of the job do not match what you can bring. I think he's a good example of that.
You know, some of you were here when my daughter came and spoke. And she's always been delighted that she was a girl and not a boy because I had in mind naming her Peter. I talked about the number of Democrats who donate to the party being larger than the number of Republicans. I thought, yeah, but the Republicans, those who don't donate so much more that their numbers exceed the Democrats, right? How much you'd agree with that? Wrong. The fact is that the actual dollar donation amount is higher, not by much, 3 or 4 percentage point among Democrats than it is among Republicans. Democrats raise more money. Interesting. But the numbers are so close. And again, is it a good thing for our country that they're that close? Which goes back then, I want to say it goes back to the search of the president's house. Don?
It's a race now.
You know, in my opinion, one of maybe the biggest problem we have today in our political system is money. Money is buying everything. If you've got enough money and you put it in the right places, you get done what you want to get done, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent for the country as a whole. And as long as that continues, and it's obviously going to, I don't know how they're going to straighten things out. How the government can actually function as it should, as really a representative of the people, when in reality, in many cases, they're representing individual companies or individual groups. Yeah,
How many of you agree with that statement by show of hands? More liberals agree with that than, no, I saw some Republican hands going up. Charlie, under his breath, said George Soros. If George Soros had as much money as he has been alleged to have given to Democrats over the last several years, he would be a phenomenally wealthy man. He's not that wealthy. He is wealthy, but not that wealthy.
The Cox brothers.
Interesting enough, you say the Koch brothers, and there are implications in that. They call themselves the Koch brothers.
That's a drink.
That was a joke, too. Doug?
I have a general comments on the discussion so far. First, with respect to the arrival of the FBI at Mar-a-Lago, if you have a search warrant, the search warrant is going to indicate the suspected statute that has been violated and what the purpose of the search warrant is. In addition, when the search warrant is served, a copy is to be left. Now, at this point, my understanding is a copy was never left. So
Left with the lawyers.
Oh, it's left with the lawyers. Okay, well, thank you. I guess the other thing on the whole context of this conversation, for me, President Biden is our president. He is my president. You know, whether or not I voted for him is my own matter, but he is my president. He does deserve my respect. And I'm going to go a step further in the sense that he deserves my prayers and support for his success. Now, I do not like this. We seem to be on a direction where if let's say Biden is elected and we did not vote for him, then we're going to spend the next several years figuring out that we're going to try to establish that he's a crook, et cetera, or whatever. And on the reverse side, if Trump might run again, we're going to make sure that there's as much dirt on his face as possible. That does not help the United States in the world with the things that degenerated to the point the United States is really the sole superpower in the world. And you might say on the sidelines, or maybe even they're already on the field at the 40-yard line, we got China and Russia just watching as we almost self-destroy here. So, you know, I guess I like to look at do I have concerns about the 2020 election? Yes. It is what it is. We have a process in this country for determining who the president is. That process was followed, and Biden is our president, period. Now, looking forward, we have elections coming up. Well, that things may change in a couple of years, et cetera, et cetera. But I would like to be forward-looking with respect to direction and with respect to the international community unity. And I'm sad that probably our cable news stations are probably as much at fault as anyone of this, but I'd like to be focusing on unity and what we can do going forward.
Totally agree. And as I said, one of the things that alarms me a little bit about the recent elections or the elections coming up in November is that the primaries selected in 3 states at least, and I don't know them exactly right, I think Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Arizona may have the states wrong, people who thought Biden was falsely elected and who had a role in the election process in their states. I would hate to think that the allegation is that whoever did that before, the election supervisor in Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, did something to tilt the election, and they're going to go in with a different person and tilt it back. I happen to believe 99.9% of the votes were counted the way they were cast. There was very, very little fraud. That everybody who went there was a good person trying to do a good job. And I hope to think most of them weren't that. I believe they weren't political activists who were there to skew the election one way or the other. But I'm afraid those 3 primary winners, do you all know who I'm talking about?
Yes.
They're coming in politically motivated to skew the result. And I hope that that doesn't happen. Doug?
Sadly, I believe it's a fact also that the Democratic Governors Association has been funding some of these Republican outliers. It's in several of these states. And I'm worried too, let's say in the case of Florida, if let's say in the Democratic primary there was only one candidate, there's no real contested position, that you could switch parties, you could ask for a Republican ballot and essentially cast your ballot for whatever reason you wanted to use it for, I guess, which I don't agree with.
Again, well said. Is there more to talk about on the search for the house in Mar-a-Lago? Don, you want to say more on that?
I was just noted in this morning's news saying that some of the documents that they took out of it contain or were nuclear, about nuclear, very top secret nuclear weapons information.
I read the same thing. I look forward to 3 o'clock this afternoon when ostensibly we're going to see both the judge's approved search warrant and the key revelations. I think we should wait until then to see, but I heard the same thing. And if there's some nuclear information there that might be beneficial in any way, shape, or form to somebody that shouldn't have it, then hurrah for a search. But I hope it's not just, we'll see at 3 o'clock. Did I see another hand go up? Let's talk a little bit then about the second and third and fourth things that I have on the table. We'll start anywhere we'd like. How do we feel about a $50 billion injection into our chip-making industry? Is that generally a positive thing?
Long overdue.
As much as I agree with that completely, it seems to me $50 billion in our chip-making thing can be matched so quickly by the Chinese that we'll spend all this money perfecting a current approach to chip-making while they're totally changing the approach and coming up with something different. Now, what you do about that? The fact of the matter, what I would hope would someday eventually be the case is that we could comfortably trade internationally without worrying that doing so puts us at a disadvantage. There ought not to be a reason for us to not wear Mexican-made clothing, for heaven's sakes, if that makes any sense. Anything more on chips? I called it gun control or assault weapon bans. The only piece of gun legislation to get through Congress in a gajillion years, and it was opposed by the NRA, is the bill that Cornyn worked on. And I think it does 3 things. I think it has a red flag provision if you know somebody who is about to be, or it might be dangerous or out of control and has a weapon, the authorities can come in and take the weapon away. It has the ability for a live-in arrangement, if one of the live-in partners is concerned, to take a weapon away. And the third I've forgotten. Do you, generally speaking, agree with that legislation?
Doesn't go far enough.
Joan?
Didn't go far enough.
I'd like to know why we let the NRA tell us anything about how we run our lives in our country. They are responsible for giving so much money to people running. It is just ridiculous. Why are we paying any attention to them?
Don?
The the man behind me has already said, the whole thing is money, money, money. And that's what seems to control everything that we, and until we limit that or get back to some semblance of a citizen electorate, we're gonna be in trouble.
Talk about how would you do that? How do we do
I
that?
don't know.
John?
You do this, I believe they do it in Britain. The government pays for all of these, running for office.
Yeah, the candidates.
The candidate run.
And they have a much shorter campaign period.
Very, very much shorter, and the government pays for it. You cannot take money out from outside.
Do we still have the dollar deduction in our income taxes for the election support? We do.
Only to the tax, to the license cap. A lot of the programs are not deductible.
Only to the parties themselves, not to the, you can't give it to some cause that you like and get the dollar. If we increase that by a fairly small amount, I mean, I say fairly small, to $5, I think, and if somebody here knows, I'd love to hear it, that we could really quite generously fund the election process. And then combine that with a ban on private money or a cap on private money to a very low cap. A problem with, you just think about how are candidates selected. Where do they come from? How many of you have been active in your political party? Stuffing envelopes or doing something at the party office? I did it for a long time as a kid because we were active Democrats in Idaho and there were so few. And walked along. I don't know if I've told you the story before about the ditch. I'll risk repeating it. We were given leaflets to take around and leave at the doors of all the houses in a section of the community. And I had this pack, it was that high, and I was trudging along, I was 12 years old. And I dropped it off religiously at the first 3 or 4 houses and then said, this is just ridiculous. And there was a ditch running by the houses, and I threw the rest of these things in the ditch. And then we went down later, and we were all celebrating our work that day, when coming down the ditch next to the celebration, bobbing along, was this big block of information folders, and everybody looked at me appropriately. But working in the office is a really important thing to do. And one would think doing that would elevate people to candidate status. And if not working in the campaign, then actively supporting candidates from the party in lower level races, right? Many of our candidates today happen to be personalities for whatever reason, or financial people for obvious reasons. And the parties, regardless of who's been stuffing envelopes, solicit those faces who are well-known faces to come run for office. And that's understandable, makes a lot of sense. But they've done nothing political, nothing for their party until suddenly they're the candidate. Sally Ann?
But we live in a Kardashian society in this country. We're very, very taken with celebrities. And so some of those celebrities are famous just because somebody said they're a celebrity. Or in the case of the Kardashians, and of course I think that has been part of former President Trump's appeal. It was just face recognition and an airplane that says Trump and whatever. I imagine he did not stuff envelopes as a kid.
What's the name of the gubernatorial candidate for the Democrats in Pennsylvania?
Senate candidate.
Dr. Oz.
He's Republican. Democratic candidate, John
Fetterman.
John Fetterman. I have a hunch Fetterman came up through the ranks. He wasn't the personality, was he, or was he? I don't know. Certainly not like Oz. I think he is one of those up through the ranks. And it'll be very interesting to see who wins that election. Whether it's the nearly 90% recognition, facial recognition of Oz, or the policies and personality and whatever else of Fetterman.
Do you think this changed? I mean, it used to be that we were very taken with, for example, Eisenhower, an important general. And then I think the switch kind of came with Reagan. Was he our first movie
How
star?
can you say that Reagan wasn't the face that everybody knew?
No, I'm saying that. I'm saying he was the first movie star.
How can you say that Eisenhower was the face that everybody didn't know? He was the leading general in the war we just won. I think he would have been chosen. In fact, the Democrats said if the Republicans didn't choose him, they would. That's how popular he was. My point, so I'm not trying to disagree with you.
He was a general, not a movie star. We've gone in a movie star direction, I think. Or TV personality, or whatever.
But this business of how the process works has to be fixed alongside any cap on money or any other method of raising the money. Because if the money is spent to woo the face and say, if you run, we will fund, I'm not sure that that's, I don't know, it discomforts me, let's put it that way. I don't know if there's a better system. Any more on candidate selection and the Cornyn bill, the election reform? Several of you said we could go further. When you think of the fact that Cornyn came up with something that could get done, red flag and live-ins, what else can get done? What else is sufficiently nonpartisan or non-polemic that it could pass in terms of election reform? What would the memorandum from the Vickers community to Congress say? I can't believe we'd send them a blank page. Do better. John, Doug?
Well, first, election laws are basically a state decision. And I think that at this point, I think I read someplace that actually of our various states, 33 states have amended their election laws in the last couple of years.
Do you know why?
So we may be in the situation right now, well, let's see how we're doing with, we've got different states that have done different things. Let's see what the results of these are. Are these barring people from voting, or are they increasing the integrity of the election? So I think we've had a number of states implement changes. Let's see what the results of those are.
The initiative for those states to do that came from a Supreme Court decision. And the states that did modify, it's possible, and I happen to be more concerned about it, is that it's going to limit voting more than expand voting. You're dead right, let's see. I don't know how many of the new laws will be enforced in effect in this November. I think that varies by state. But I think it's something important to watch. And to watch it from the perspective of, does state control of the elections, full control? They've always been able to set the rules, but they had to do so under the rubric of a Supreme Court decision, a federal decision, that a certain level of fairness and equity exists. And I can't remember all the other elements. Was it the Botts case that was decided? It was one of the first or second decisions of the new court. And the implications could be quite adverse to the voting process. November, or the earliest time that those new laws are in effect, is going to be something to watch closely. I fear I'd feel more comfortable if the minute that happened, California, New York, all the Democratic states changed the rules. The fact is, most of those 30 states were Republican states in the middle of the country. That concerns me a bit. What else is current? I've exhausted my list of thought topics. No one's concerned about our invasion of Guatemala. What about their invasion of the United States?
How about China?
I think China is a great topic, Don. And one of the issues there is they're really doing what for years those of us in international activities were just hoping they would do. They've increased political participation. More than 500 million Chinese have been lifted out of abject poverty. That's really impressive. And they've done so primarily by introducing free market measures, limiting. I know it's limited free market, Doug. You're dead right. But it's at least limited free market. It allows certain activities on the part of individuals. And the credit for that lifting out of poverty is generally speaking given to those tinkering changes around the edges.
That direction was established 30 years ago, and it has not been increased emphasis in the last two administrations.
Don was making a point that I didn't know, and I want to research that the direction of lifting out of poverty isn't something new. And the last two governments, including Xi, have modified or stopped the changes. Is that what you're saying?
Have limited it.
Have limited the changes. It'll be interesting to see because the achievement was so dramatic. I've worked in different groups on poverty alleviation. Again, primarily in Africa and parts of South America and parts of Asia. China just seemed too big a problem, as did India, to even address. And I remember at a meeting not long ago, maybe it was 10 years ago, which is not long here, while we were lamenting our inability to move the poverty needle, someone stood up and said, have you looked at China? 500 million people is a lot more than any of us even thought about. We'd have been ecstatic with 5 million people have been lifted out of poverty. India, though, did a similar thing. I don't know how much you know about that, Don, but it was different, not necessarily different, a little more effective free market, less government regulation. I think we talk here about the hobgoblin of regulation in our economy. Just try to do business in India. It's just silly. There are so many bureaucrats and so many levels of bureaucratic regulation. And if those are loosened a little bit, which they are, I don't know whether the number is 500 million lifted out of poverty, but I'll come back next week and we can talk about that. How about China as a military threat to the United States? Are they now? Are they becoming? And first of all, why? They've never been an expansive country before. Is Taiwan alone their expansive objective?
It'll be the prime one for now.
Well, they're all over Africa, and it's even Central and South America, developing commercial operations.
Yeah, two answers, and they're both interesting. Furman says that yes, they right now they are militarily interested if they have to be in Taiwan. And Don Maley says that the expansion of China into the rest of the world, particularly the developing world, using money for development is something that we've all been aware of. Should we be alarmed by that?
It's going to influence them. It's going to influence those people positively, that these people came in and helped us, where the United States or Europe did not to the same degree. And they're making quite an effort to do that in these underdeveloped areas, which is going to leave a positive effect, I believe, from a diplomatic point of view of getting things done China might want to get done and to get support from these countries in the future.
No question, though, I have some caveats. Don?
you're right back to the one thing, money. You're right back to money. It's the same thing in a different, it's the NRA, only it's China doing it. To facilities that they will be able to share for, say, naval operations or air operations in the Horn of Africa. They're investing money to receive support.
Does anybody know what our current international assistance budget is right now? That funds AIA and that would fund that kind of activity on the part of the United States. I don't know the exact number, but it's de minimis compared to China. It's probably the amount China spent in any one of these countries. A lot of the development is not necessarily appropriate to any kind of military use now or ever. It clearly has the impact of influence. Although I have to say, personally, and this is only a small, and it's a personal, and it's 20 years old. Pakistan, we built 3 power plants in Pakistan, and one of them, a Chinese subcontractor, won the contract. Now, understand that when our guys, when the United States, including our companies, construction people went to Pakistan to work on the power plant, we didn't bring low-level employees. We had maybe 3 or 4 Americans there and hired all the rest from Pakistan. When the Chinese subcontractor, did their portion of the work at the plant, it was all Chinese. There were a gajillion Chinese everywhere you looked. And I think that's happened, I'd like to research that, but I think that's happened in many other countries too. And that doesn't develop or increase the level of public support as much as you'd think. They may get a bridge or a road or an airport out of it, but they resent the fact that they didn't get jobs. That's one thing. The other thing is I wonder what's going on with the maintenance of these investments after the Chinese build them. Who here wants to accept all or any part of the research on that topic? Thank you very much for volunteering. But really, if individually you'd like to do that, there are some very good questions there. The Belt and Bridges, I think it's called, or Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese is a major program. It's been going on now for more than a decade. The results are in several countries. It'd be interesting to know more about it and more about its implications. Have they established really strong military footholds in those countries? Did you have something, Sal?
I didn't volunteer.
Joan?
I think one of the things that's interesting on a smaller level is the LIV Gulf formation to try to overcome the PGA organization that is already established with the Saudi money. And if you watch that and you read about the things that are going on in court, they're charging Live, some of the people that have gone. Do you all know about what's going on in the golf world? Well, in the golf world, the PGA has pretty much been our major organizer of professional golf in this country. And now the Saudis have put up billions of dollars, and they have gotten people to join their league. And now the PGA has canceled some of the contracts of those players that they had. Now, some of those players are charging the PGA for barring them from coming to play. It's almost like a non-compete clause. And it's very interesting, and it's going up and through the courts. So it's something to watch, because again, it's the money.
Yeah. The PGA is monopoly, but Gavin, it's our monopoly. I'm sorry, Johnny, I overspoke you.
Well, it's so funny because they're charging the PGA with running a monopoly, but LIV is forming, and then they're trying to say, well, I wonder what would happen if some other player from the PGA said they wanted to play in the LIV. They're trying to establish the same kind of order, but it's the money. It's always the money.
Wasn't Bedminster live event recently?
Yes, well,
Have they prohibited PGA players from playing in that event?
they did.
How do we feel
And they're
about?
also playing the Trump courses. That's
It's also, they are Trump courses. What would happen though if both of those organizations allowed the other members of other organizations free access to play in their events? What would be wrong with that?
Well, follow the court cases. It's very interesting.
3 of the players that sued because they were not allowed to play in the PGA course tournament, the courts said that the Saudis have paid them more money than they ever made, so they have no right than they ever made in their entire careers. They had no right to say that they were being punished financially.
Well, I, for one, am absolutely opposed to it, and the only thing that possibly would make me change my attitude was some of that Saudi money. It's troublesome because I'm
Not good is your game. Not good is your game.
tennis. And nobody's offered me $50 million to play tennis. It's interesting the role of money in so many of the problems we've talked about here. And on the one hand, it's so disturbing to see the money play such a role. On the other hand, those employees who do the work at those organizations have to have money to do it. That means you have to charge money at golf courses and use the money that's raised in ways that make sense. Money is a part of our system, and I shudder to think what would happen if we went back to an old-style Soviet system where money was equalized across the board, and some state dweeb decided what golf courses you could play in, who could play golf, who could not play golf. What a terrible world that would be. So as troublesome as money is in our system, boy, it's the worst system imaginable except all the others. Now, I think, Doug, you had one comment, and then we're going to wrap it up. Oh, kind of.
I was really going back to the China situation. This was back over half a century. But when I was in Nam, the Vietnamese hated the Chinese. And if we overran an NBA North Vietnamese position with their equipment and their tooling and so on, it was from Eastern Europe, East Germany. There was nothing, no Chinese equipment at all. They were getting their logistical support from basically the communist countries in Eastern Europe.
It's fascinating to have somebody who was there. I always thought that when we got too close to North Vietnam, the Chinese entered the fray, and that's what made the thing so difficult. I had no idea that the Eastern Europeans were providing equipment and funds. It's fascinating. Jim.
50 years ago, I lived in Somalia. And to show the consistency of Chinese foreign policy, they came into Somalia because the dictator in Somalia, 2 years earlier, before 72, came to power. And he wanted the Chinese in to compete with the Americans and the British. The Americans had put millions and millions of dollars through AID into Somalia because it was a strategic objective for the Suez Canal. Now, here was an example of, yes, the Chinese were in uniform. It was the Chinese army. And they supplied the labor. So the Somalis did not get jobs or making roads and so forth. But they've been doing this for 50 years. Now, you either, if you're a leader of a country, you either want to have roads built by the Chinese, or most likely you won't have roads. So they are very competitive in that sense. And I don't see them cutting back. It seems as though the Chinese have adopted this philosophy and it has worked for 50 years. So I don't think we should change our policy, but I'm just saying the Chinese are here to stay, and we need to figure out how to deal with them as a competitor in the world, both militarily and commercially.
You make a good point, Jim. You know, one of the things that troubles me there, how many of you worked with or around AID, the Agency for International Development?
Would you repeat the question?
How many of you worked in or around AID and know about their programs? All of our international efforts, and that was 30 years of my life, was spent in part asking our government to support us. And the vehicles for support were the Ex-Im Bank, that could make loans to American companies to do something in the countries where we worked, or AID. And even AID had to have a political reason to be in that country or do something in that country. But it was pennies compared to what the Chinese were spending. Pennies. And it's not gone up since the 30 years ago. It's going down. And I don't know how many of you would willingly pay more taxes to fund more AID so that we could compete more aggressively with the Chinese. But I was speaking out, not a lot of you. We could always charge the youth and say anybody under 75 has to pay a lot more money.
I'll go along with that.
I bet there's a lot of support here for that. Over the course of the next several weeks, we can do one of two things. Over the last 5 weeks, I think, we've invited speakers from different walks of life. A lot of credit goes to Doug and Carol Lee, who's not here, and I appreciate that. Sometimes I've felt like the discussion wasn't as robust as it might have been with the nominees. On the other hand, there are other topics about which I clearly know nothing, and the rest of you can't lie any better than I can. So it might make some sense to get, an ecology expert or a genealogy. I don't know. How do you feel about more speakers, less speakers, more open discussion like this? Feedback would be appreciated.
I like these discussions personally.
Amen.
Well, it seems the vast majority of people who speak.
We had 4 people speak today.
And that's a good point. That's a very good point. And one of the reasons, but how many more people do we have speak when there's an outside speaker? More?
No, Charlie. How about the time?
How about the time when we broke into smaller groups and we everybody had the same number of topics to talk about, and then they had a report, and that way everybody would speak, because the problem is that nobody is speaking.
Yeah, the only person who can effectively do that dresses in black, and I'm not sure that we want to. Now, I think actually, and I mean it very sincerely, Table Talk, the thing that Charlie has organized and done, we've done it 3 times, I think, is really effective at allowing everybody a chance to talk and share their views. And I would think, Charlie, if you're up to it, another Table Talk, if not next week, then the following week would really be nice. You don't have to commit now, but, or if somebody else would like to take a shot working with Charlie, and maybe we'll have alternatives. But I think the idea of a table talk every 4 weeks, say, and open discussions between then, and only if there's a dynamite speaker to invite the speaker is the right way to go. Charlie?
Just an observation. Today we had 2 occasions where there was an outburst of applause. And I'm wondering why.
Well, first of all, I didn't hear the applause for Charlie and his table talks. Now we've had 3.
Seriously, I'm just curious as to those of you who applauded, why did you do it?
I'd like to answer. I applauded because both times it was for Doug. And what Doug talked about was unity and coming together. And the news is difficult. It's difficult to process. It changes every single day. And I think it's depressing. And so we come here to discuss things that are depressing and worrisome. And his point of view today offered hope. And it offered just sort of a gentle approach to the world and what can we do to come together and unify and so forth. And I think that roused an emotion in me, anyway, that felt good.
How can you applaud with a microphone in your hand?
I can't.
Didn't you?
But I think that's dead right. One of the tragedies of news, and you all know this, the old phrase is, if it bleeds, it leads, in the newspaper world. Meaning if it's controversial, if something bad happens, then we'll report it. Otherwise, who cares? One of the things I think we've been able to do, and it's been one of our objectives, is discuss things disagreeable, but do so agreeably. And we've done that consistently for the last 2 years. Thank you for your participation today. I look forward to seeing all of you. We started, by the way, with 16, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15, 18. We're now at 28. You know, late arrivals are just as welcome as those that are here early. But invite friends. This is something that I think is important to Vickers Landing. There's going to be a challenge come November, December, when will be 2 campuses. How do we bring those 2 campuses together in this one auditorium? This is where current events will be held at that time. While I will be moving over to Oak Ridge, I fully intend to continue to show up here at 10 o'clock on Friday morning, and I hope you will too. Thank you.